You click this video to finally understand Zeno, the potential clone of Albert Wesker created by the Connections, given all of Wesker's powers but none of his history, and driven by a desperate need to prove he's better than the original. Tonight, I'm going to tell you Zeno's complete story, how the Connections cloned Wesker, why Zeno serves them, what his relationship with Victor Gideon reveals about the villain hierarchy, and why being called a mere imitation is the one thing that breaks him. If you enjoy this, please consider liking and subscribing. It tells me you'd like more deep dives like this. Zeno's introduction in Resident Evil 9 is a calculated shock for anyone familiar with the history of the Umbrella Corporation. He doesn't appear in a lab, but at the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, arriving just as the facility begins to tear itself apart. He's first seen at the helipad, a cold figure silhouetted against the chaos of the courtyard. He's there to claim Grace Ashcroft, taking her onto a helicopter with a detached professional grace that feels hauntingly familiar. From that first moment, the game wants you to feel the weight of a ghost returning to the world. He carries himself with the same surgical arrogance that defined Albert Wesker, wearing the signature dark attire and moving with a speed that defies human perception. His hair is slicked back, and his eyes are hidden behind dark lenses, a uniform of power that signals he's more than just a mercenary. The game uses this entrance to suggest that the Wesker project didn't end in an African volcano, but simply went underground. It's a moment designed to pull the player back into the dread of the Spencer era, making it clear that a new, perfect successor has finally arrived to finish what was started. The blurred movement he uses to secure the courtyard is a statement of biological intent. He doesn't struggle with the infected or the security. He simply exists in a different tactical reality. This first appearance at Rhodes Hill sets a specific expectation for the rest of the journey toward Raccoon City. It tells you that the threats of the past haven't been buried. They've been refined into something that can operate in broad daylight. Zeno is the face of that refinement, a man who acts like he owns the history of every virus ever produced in a basement. This introduction is meant to be overwhelming because it breaks the rules of the current timeline. You're watching a man who looks and sounds like a dead legend, performing feats that should have died with the Spencer dynasty. The care center helipad becomes a stage where the legacy of the progenitor virus is on full display. Zeno doesn't just mimic Albert, he inhabits his shadow perfectly. It's a masterclass in narrative tension that forces the audience to question if they're looking at a resurrected monster or a terrifying new branch on a very old family tree. Zeno's role within the Connections is far more significant than a standard field agent. He serves as a high-level overseer, a rank that places him at the center of the syndicate's most sensitive biological interests. The Connections are the same group that manufactured the mold and the E-series weapons, and they don't invest in anything that doesn't offer a global return. Zeno isn't just an executive who manages assets. He's a living asset himself. He's treated as the syndicate's ultimate insurance policy, a final measure of force that ensures their experiments stay profitable and their secrets stay dead. The organization views Zeno as a weapon first and a leader second. His rank suggests that he's the bridge between the old world of Umbrella and the new era of the black market. He isn't a visionary like Spencer, but a professional overseer who understands the mechanical value of a biological god complex. He manages the scientific progress at the ARC facility with a cold, analytical eye, ensuring that the researchers like Victor Gideon stay focused on the bottom line. It's a hierarchy built on raw force, where Zeno's physical superiority is the only contract he needs to maintain his status. This unique position within the connections also reveals the group's transition away from erratic bioweapons like Evelyn. They've moved toward reproducible, structured assets that can follow orders and maintain a professional veneer while they commit atrocities. Zeno represents the successful industrialization of the Wesker phenotype. He isn't a child who needs a family. He's a professional who understands the strategic cost of every outbreak. The syndicate treats him with a mixture of fear and reverence, knowing he's the only thing standing between their research and total government intervention. His presence at the center of the Rhodes Hill abduction proves his importance to the syndicate's endgame. He's tasked with securing Grace because she's the key to the ultimate biological stabilizer, and he won't let a DSO agent like Leon S. Kennedy interfere with that acquisition. This rank gives him the authority to burn entire facilities just to cover his tracks. He is a man who has been trained to lead a new world, even if he's just a high-end tool for the people who actually sign the checks. It's a position of immense power, built on a foundation of absolute corporate servitude. The most devastating critique of Zeno doesn't come from his enemies, but from his partner, Victor Gideon. Gideon is the scientific mind behind much of the current research, and he doesn't hide his professional contempt for the man in the black coat. He calls Zeno nothing but an imitation, a line that cuts directly through Zeno's carefully constructed God complex. This isn't just a personal insult, it's a clinical observation from the man who knows the genetic data. Gideon understands that Zeno's DNA is a forgery, a copy of a legend that lacks the fundamental spark of the original. This line reveals the core tragedy of Zeno's existence in Resident Evil 9. He's trying to occupy a throne that his biology can't actually support. He wants to be the heir to the Wesker legacy, but he's just a biochemical fraud built in a tube to look like a hero. Gideon's words strip away the mask of arrogance, leaving behind a man who is desperately trying to prove he belongs in the room with the creators. It's a reminder that you can't build a real god with just a needle and a stolen genetic map. Zeno's reaction to being called an imitation is one of quiet, lethal rage. He knows Gideon is right, and that knowledge fuels his cruelty toward everyone around him. He overcompensates by being more violent and more demanding, trying to force the world to see the power he thinks he possesses. He's an identity thief who has stolen the style and the power of Albert Wesker, but he lacks the natural compatibility that made Albert an anomaly. He's a man living in a mansion built for someone else, and the walls are starting to close in. The imitation label also highlights the desperation of the connections. They were so desperate for a new Wesker that they were willing to settle for a high-end fake. They didn't care if Zeno was a real successor, as long as he could act like one on a helicopter or in a lab. This makes Zeno a sympathetic figure in a very dark way, as he's a victim of corporate ambition who was created specifically to fail. He's a shadow trying to cast its own light, and Gideon is the only person honest enough to tell him he's still just a shadow. You'll see details that his tactical gear is meant to hide. Underneath the reinforced fabric, there are faint, localized scars characteristic of Raccoon City Syndrome. These aren't birthmarks, They're the markings of secondary T virus exposure. This proves that Zeno wasn't born in a sterile lab as a clean slate. He was a person before he was a project, a survivor of a previous outbreak, who was reclaimed by Umbrella or the connections to be rebuilt into a weapon. This scarring suggests that Zeno might have been one of the thousands of civilians caught in the original 98 outbreak. Instead of being rescued, he was likely taken into custody by a company that saw his survival as a biological opportunity. His natural resistance to the T virus is probably what made him a viable candidate for the progenitor integration later in life. He was a survivor who was recycled into a monster, his past life erased and replaced with the genetic code of a dead man. The scars are a link to the original sin of the franchise. The presence of Raccoon City Syndrome on his body is a physical proof that his origins are messy and grounded in the series' history. It connects him directly to the ruins of the Midwestern town, making his story a continuation of that tragedy rather than a new beginning. He's a man whose very existence is built on the biological debris of the past. The scars are a reminder that the T virus doesn't just kill, it marks the ones who stay alive. Zeno carries the weight of that city on his skin, a permanent reminder that he's an extension of a rot that started decades ago. This detail also explains why Zeno's biology is so unstable compared to Albert Wesker's. He's a human host who has been overwritten by a viral engine, and the two are in a state of constant, quiet war. The Raccoon City Syndrome is a sign of a body that has already been pushed to its biological limit before the cloning or splicing even began. It's a warning that Zeno is a house built on a foundation of ruins. He's a survivor who was turned into a weapon, and the scars are the only thing left of the person he used to be before he became a 0-1 asset. The physical power Zeno displays throughout the game is a terrifying echo of the past. He exhibits the blink and you miss it, movement speed, and the ability to punch through reinforced steel with a single strike. These are the hallmark traits of a successful progenitor strain integration, the same gifts that allowed Albert Wesker to dominate his enemies for years. Zeno doesn't just fight, he ends encounters in seconds, moving with a fluidity that makes the human eye feel useless. He is a biological apex predator, a creature that has been engineered to be the ultimate soldier. His combat style is a brutal, efficient form of martial arts that mimics Albert's combat data to a frightening degree. He moves with a calculated precision, using only the energy required to destroy his target. This suggests that his training wasn't just physical, but was likely based on the recorded movements of the original Wesker children. He's a living replay of a dead man's greatest hits, a weapon that has been programmed to be perfect in every engagement. He fights with the confidence of a man who knows he's physically superior to everything in the room. But there's a specific kind of violence in Zeno's strength that feels different from Albert's coldness. Albert was a man who enjoyed his power, but Zeno uses it like a shield. His speed is a distraction for his instability, and his strength is a way to hide the fact that he's a forgery. He fights with a desperate intensity, as if every punch is a bid for validation from the scientists watching him. This makes him a more erratic combatant than his predecessor, a man who will burn through his stamina just to make a point about his own dominance. The progenitor powers are what give him his status as the syndicate's final measure of force. He is the result of 60 years of biological engineering, a man who has become a god through the power of a flower from West Africa. He is the ultimate achievement of the connections, even if that achievement is built on a foundation of stolen DNA. When he moves, the air feels heavier, a physical manifestation of the viral load he's carrying. He is the final word on human evolution, or at least the corporate version of it. Zeno's biology is sustained by a refined version of the prototype virus, the same agent that was given to the 13 Wesker children by Oswell Spencer. This provides the base for his superhuman abilities, but it isn't enough to keep him functional on its own. Files found in the ARC facility hint at V-Act integration, the same biological process that creates Crimson Heads. This secondary mutation protocol keeps his body in a state of constant evolution, preventing the cellular decay that usually claims imperfect hosts. It's a biological engine that never stops running, rewriting his cells in real time. By integrating the V-Act process into Zeno's system, the connections have created a creature that is always on the edge of a breakthrough. His cells are constantly repairing damage and increasing their efficiency, which is what allows him to maintain his speed and strength. It's a cycle of decay and rebirth that keeps him alive in a world that his DNA should have rejected. However, this constant mutation makes his cellular stability incredibly fragile. He's like a building that's being constantly renovated while the fire is still burning in the basement. This V-Act integration is a desperate measure that proves the prototype virus wasn't enough to make a new Wesker. The connections had to reach back into the archives of the Arklay Research Center to find a way to keep Zeno upright. They've turned him into a biological high-wire act, a man who is always one heartbeat away from a catastrophic mutation. The V-Act keeps him strong, but it also keeps him on the edge of a cliff. He's a weapon that's always in the process of firing, and eventually, the internal pressure is going to be too much for the host to handle. The fragility of this state is why Zeno is so dangerous and so dependent on medical intervention. He knows that his body is a lie, a temporary arrangement of viral material that is only being held together by the syndicate's stabilizers. He's a weapon that has been over-engineered to meet a corporate standard. A man who has traded his biological soul for a power he can't even truly control. The V-Act is a reminder that the T-virus and its derivatives were never meant to create stable life. They were meant to create assets that burn bright and then burn out. For all his speed and strength, Zeno falls short of the man he mimics in several critical ways. Unlike Albert, who achieved a perfect, stable integration with the virus, Zeno requires frequent stabilization injections to keep his body from collapsing. He's a high-maintenance weapon, a creature that needs constant medical attention just to stay human for a few more hours. These injections are the only thing holding back the V-Act mutation, and without them, he would dissolve into a mass of mindless tissue in a matter of days. This is the gap that defines his existence, the proof that he's not a true genetic anomaly. The most visible sign of this failure is in his eyes. While Albert's eyes were permanently slit and glowing, Zeno's eyes flicker between human and reptilian, especially when he is stressed or when his stabilizer levels are running low. It's a physical glitch in his God complex, a reminder that his humanity is still trying to fight its way out of the viral shell. These flickers are a sign that his body is rejecting the power he craves. He has the strength of a Wesker, but he lacks the natural genetic compatibility that made Albert the perfect host for the progenitor legacy. This lack of compatibility is what makes Zeno so bitter toward the survivors of the past. He knows he's a biological failure on a fundamental level, a man who has been given the keys to a kingdom he's too weak to rule. This makes his arrogance feel hollow. a performance for an audience of scientists who already know the truth of his medical files. He's a creature of the lab, a product that didn't quite meet the manufacturing standards of the original Project W. Albert was a fluke of nature, while Zeno is a manufactured imitation that requires a team of doctors to stay vertical. The frequent injections also make Zeno a slave to the organization he serves. He can't leave the ARC facility for long because he needs the specific serum they produce to keep his cells from melting. He's a god on a leash, a man who has traded his freedom for a power he can't even keep without help. This is the ultimate difference between him and his predecessor. Albert was a free agent who manipulated everyone around him, while Zeno is a corporate asset who is being managed like a piece of equipment. He's a prisoner of his own DNA, trapped inside a body that was never meant to be his. Part 8. Elpis and the Power. He lost by injecting himself, destroyed. Everything he was. The end of Zeno's story is a violent proof of his own inadequacy. In a moment of absolute desperation, during the collapse of the facility, Zeno injects himself with the Elpis strain. He believes that this new, powerful agent will be the final step in his evolution, the thing that finally stabilizes his cells and turns him into a true god. He thinks he's finally found the shortcut to the perfection he's been chasing his entire life. But the Elpis strain wasn't built to grant power. It was built to end it. His unstable progenitor base reacts with the antiviral in a way that is nothing short of catastrophic. Instead of granting him the final evolution, the Elpis virus acts like a purge. It triggers a rapid onset mutation as it tries to strip the viral material from his DNA. The V-Act protocol, which had been holding his cells together, finally fails under the pressure of the antiviral attack. In a matter of seconds, the man who wanted to be Wesker is replaced by a grotesque, multi-limbed nightmare. The mutation becomes uncontrolled, turning his refined form into a mass of mindless tissue. This failure is the final validation of Gideon's contempt, proving that Zeno was never the one to begin with. The mutation is a physical manifestation of Zeno's fundamental lie. The horror he becomes is a creature of pure chaos, a biological rejection of the order he tried to impose on the world. It shows that the T-virus derivatives are inherently destructive when they aren't matched with a perfect host. Zeno's body was a patch of forgeries, and the Elpis strain simply pulled the thread that unraveled everything he was. He dies as a monster, a creature that has lost all traces of the human he used to be before he was reclaimed. It's a fitting end for a man who spent his life trying to be someone else. This moment is a reminder of the danger of human arrogance and corporate ambition. Zeno thought he could control the most volatile viruses in history through sheer force of will. But biology doesn't care about willpower. It only cares about compatibility. His final form is a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can build a god in a lab using stolen pieces of the past. You can copy the code and you can mimic the style, but you can't fake the foundation. Zeno was a biochemical fraud who was finally exposed by the very power he tried to steal, leaving nothing behind but a mass of rotting, mutated flesh. Section 3. The Clone Theory. Part 9. The Strongest Theory. Why the evidence points to Zeno being a Wesker clone. The question of Zeno's true nature has a strong leading theory that connects the 1998 ruins to the 2026 present. Both the fans and the in-game files suggest that Zeno is a modified clone, created from recovered DNA samples at the Spencer Mansion or the volcano site in Africa. His physical resemblance to Albert Wesker isn't a coincidence of nature. It's a deliberate choice by the connections. They wanted to reanimate the perfect soldier using 21st century cloning technology, bypassing the natural lottery that produced Albert in the first place. They wanted a weapon they could own. The evidence for this theory is found in the ARC facility's digital records, which contain maps of Wesker's genome modified with secondary agents to increase compliance. Zeno is likely the most successful result of these experiments. A batch 01 project designed to see if the Wesker phenotype could be reproduced at scale. He isn't a son in any traditional sense, but a biological reprint. He carries the genetic memories of a man he never met, a programmed identity that was forced into his brain before he ever opened his eyes in a tube. He is the ultimate product of corporate salvage. This cloning process explains why Zeno feels like an imitation to those who knew the original. He's a copy of a copy, a man whose DNA has been spliced and edited until the original signal is lost. The connections didn't just want a clone. They wanted an improved version that was easier to manage. They added the VAC protocols and the T-virus resistance to make him more resilient. But in doing so, they destroyed the delicate balance that allowed Albert to stay human. Zeno is the victim of over-engineering, a product that was tinkered with until it broke under its own weight. The theory also keeps the ghost of Albert Wesker haunting the series, without needing to officially resurrect the man himself. It shows that the threat of the Wesker legacy isn't just in the person, but in the data left behind in the ruins of Umbrella. The connections are the ultimate scavengers, picking through the debris of the Spencer era to find the pieces they can use to build their own empire. Zeno is the most visible piece of that salvage, a man who is physical proof that the Wesker name is now a corporate product. He's a reminder that even in death, Albert's ambition continues to poison the world. Part 10. The Connections History with Cloning. What Resident Evil 9 establishes about their capabilities. The history of the Connections has always been defined by their search for the perfect, controllable weapon. In the years following the disaster in Louisiana and the failure of the Everline project, the syndicate realized that unique emotional assets were too difficult to manage. They needed something that could be reproduced in a factory setting, a soldier that carried the power of the old world with the stability of modern science. Resident Evil 9 reveals that the organization shifted its focus toward the industrialization of the Wesker phenotype. They weren't just looking for a new virus. They were looking for a way to mass-produce the man who had nearly mastered the T-virus. This shift led to the creation of the ARC facility, a place dedicated to the science of biological duplication and the refinement of stolen DNA. The syndicate utilized the data from what was known as the Shattered Star Project to attempt this resurrection. They understood that Albert Wesker was the gold standard for human evolution, and they spent years trying to decode exactly why his body had accepted the prototype virus. Their capabilities in 2026 had surpassed anything Umbrella had achieved in the 1990s. They were no longer just splicing genes. They were building entire biological profiles from scratch. This led to the creation of several batches of test subjects, each one designed to test a different aspect of the Wesker genome. Zeno was the most successful result of this program. She labeled as Batch Z01, representing the peak of their cloning efforts at the time of the Rhodes Hill incident. Zeno's existence as a reproducible asset meant that his humanity was a secondary concern for his creators. He was built to be a product that could be sold to the highest bidder once the stabilization issues were resolved. The Connections saw him as a beta version of a new world, a soldier who could be replaced if he was destroyed in the field. This clinical approach to life is what defines the ARC facility. Every room in that building is a testament to the idea that a human being is just a collection of data that can be copied and edited. They didn't want a sun, they wanted a catalog of high-end bioorganic weapons that looked and acted like the most dangerous man in history. The game establishes that this cloning process was far more widespread than just one man. The Ark facility was a factory of imitations, each one a slight variation on the original Wesker code. The connections were trying to find the exact combination of genetic markers and viral load that would create a stable, loyal god. They used the remains of the Spencer Mansion research and the data recovered from the Kijuju volcano to fill in the gaps of their maps. It was a massive, global effort to reclaim the power that died with Albert, proving that the syndicate has the resources to play God on a level that even Spencer would have envied. This history of cloning creates a sense of existential dread that hangs over the entire story. It suggests that the monsters we see on the screen aren't unique tragedies, but industrial mistakes. Zeno is the most polished version of this mistake. A man who has been given a title and a uniform to hide the fact that he's a manufactured tool. The connections have proven that they can reach into the grave and pull out a piece of the past, rewriting it for the modern era. They've turned the legacy of the Wesker project into a commodity, a shift that makes the threat of the T-virus and its children feel more permanent and more institutional than ever before. Part 11. What the game confirms versus what it leaves open, drawing the line between fact and fan theory. The narrative of Resident Evil 9 is careful to distinguish between established facts and the theories that the characters develop. It's factually confirmed through the laboratory files and Gideon's dialogue that Zeno possesses Albert Wesker's DNA. This isn't a guess. The genetic scans shown in the Ark facility prove that the sequence is a near-perfect match for the data recovered from the Umbrella archives. The game also confirms that Zeno's physical abilities and his reliance on the prototype virus are direct results of this genetic heritage. He is, by any clinical definition, an extension of the Wesker project, a biological link to the founding era of the corporation. However, the game leaves the exact nature of Zeno's creation open to interpretation. While the cloning theory is the strongest, there is a possibility that Zeno is a chimera. This would mean he was a natural human host, likely a survivor of a previous T-virus outbreak, who was spliced with Wesker's genetic code to see if the host could be overwritten. This ambiguity is a deliberate choice by the writers to keep the mystery of the character alive. It forces the player to wonder if there's a human soul buried under the viral code, or if Zeno is truly a blank slate built in a tube. The lines between a modified survivor and a direct clone are blurred, making his identity a puzzle with missing pieces. This gap between fact and theory is where the horror of Zeno's character resides. The game doesn't give you a birth certificate or a manufacturing date, leaving you to piece together his history from the scars on his skin and the contempt in Gideon's voice. The confirmation of his DNA makes him a threat, but the lack of a clear origin makes him a ghost. This keeps the spirit of Albert Wesker haunting the series without needing to officially resurrect the man himself. Zeno is a representative of a legacy, a physical proof that the data Albert left behind is just as dangerous as the man was. The fan theories often focus on whether Zeno has the memories of the original Wesker, but the game is clear that his personality is a programmed construct. He has been trained to mimic Albert's style and arrogance, but he lacks the lived experience of the mansion or the Raccoon City disaster. This is an important distinction because it reinforces the idea that Zeno is an imitation. He's a man who has been told a story about himself and is now trying to live it out. The game factually establishes his power, but leaves his humanity as a question that each player has to answer for themselves. Ultimately, the ambiguity surrounding Zeno's origins serves the larger theme of the game. It explores the idea of what happens when a corporation tries to own a legacy. Whether he's a clone or a spliced human, the fact remains that he's a manufactured identity. The game confirms the biology, but leaves the biography in the shadows, creating a character who is both a physical reality and a narrative question mark. This ensures that the closure provided by his death feels earned, as the world isn't just killing a man, but burying a corporate attempt to steal the past. Part 12, Project W. What it was, who survived it, and whether Zeno could fit into it. To understand Zeno, you have to look back at the original Project W, the ambitious eugenics program designed by Oswald Spencer in the late 20th century. Spencer's goal was to raise 13 gifted children, each one selected for their high intelligence and genetic potential, and infect them with the prototype virus. He wanted to create a new breed of superior humans who would lead his new world. Of those 13 candidates, only 2 were known to have survived the integration with full functionality: Albert Wesker and Alex Wesker. The project was considered a success on a small scale, but it ended when the subjects realized they were being used and turned against their creator. There's a persistent question in Resident Evil 9 about whether Zeno could be a lost 14th child of Project W. Some files in the ARC facility suggest that there were secondary candidates who were kept in cryostasis when they failed to show immediate compatibility with the virus. If Zeno was one of these children, it would explain his deep connection to the original project and his natural resistance to the T-virus. However, the evidence in the game leans more toward him being a post-project creation, a creature built using the data gathered from Albert's success, rather than a contemporary of the original 13. He's more of a sequel than a missing chapter. The tragedy of Project W was the cold way the children were treated as numbers rather than people. Spencer didn't care about their lives. He only cared about the results of the viral integration. This is the same philosophy that defines Zeno's relationship with the Connections. Even if he wasn't part of the original 13, he's a spiritual successor to that cruelty. He represents the continued attempt to leash the progenitor legacy to a human host. If he was a failed candidate from the original project who was later reclaimed, it would make his hatred for the survivors, like Leon, even more personal. He would be the child who was discarded and then rebuilt into a weapon. Resident Evil 9 establishes that the Wesker phenotype is the most valuable asset in the world of biological warfare. Whether Zeno is a survivor of Project W or a clone built from its data, he's the final fruit of that poison tree. The game uses his existence to remind the player of Spencer's long shadow. The project didn't end when Albert died in a volcano. It just changed hands. The Connections are simply the latest organization to try and finish what Spencer started in 1966. Zeno is the physical proof that the ambition of a dead English lord is still poisoning the 21st century. This connection to Project W gives Zeno's character a weight that a standard villain wouldn't have. He's not just a monster of the week. He's a piece of a story that's been building for decades. His failure to become a true god is a reflection of the failure of the project itself. Spencer wanted to create a master race, but all he created were weapons that eventually destroyed him. Zeno is the last gasp of that dream, a man who is trying to find a future in a project that was built on a foundation of corpses. He's a relic of a dead world, trying to fight his way into a new one. Section 4. His role in the story. Part 13. The Hunt for Grace. Why Zeno needed her and what he believed she could do. The core conflict of Resident Evil 9 is driven by Zeno's desperate hunt for Grace Ashcroft. To the world, Grace is an FBI analyst who survived a disaster. But to Zeno, she's a biological goldmine. She files recovered during the Rhodes Hill sequence reveal that Grace possesses a unique genetic marker that acts as a universal stabilizer for progenitor-based viruses. Zeno believed that by harvesting her bone marrow and processing her blood, he could create a serum that would finally fix his degrading cells. He thought she was the missing piece of his puzzle, the key that would turn him from an imitation into a true god who didn't need daily injections. Zeno's obsession with Grace wasn't motivated by a desire to help her, or even to understand her biology. It was an act of pure vanity and survival. He was watching his own body fail him, his eyes flickering and his speed becoming erratic, and he saw Grace as a resource to be plundered. He believed that with her DNA, he could achieve a permanent, stable integration with the T virus and the prototype virus. He wanted to bypass the medical teams at the ARC facility and become a self-sustaining entity. To him, Grace wasn't a human being. She was a container for the power he felt he deserved. The hunt for Grace led Zeno to commit atrocities across the Midwestern region, burning down the care center and hunting her through the ruins of the ARC facility. This pursuit defined his role in the story as a relentless predator who would stop at nothing to secure his future. He saw Grace as his path to the throne that Albert Wesker had left vacant. Every moment he spent chasing her was a moment spent trying to escape his own biological death sentence. It was a race against time, a man trying to steal a cure from a woman who had no idea she was carrying it. Zeno's belief in Grace's blood as a universal stabilizer was based on Gideon's research, but Zeno took it to an extreme. He convinced himself that he was the only one worthy of the gifts Grace's biology could provide. This arrogance blinded him to the reality that a virus like the one he carried can't be fixed by a single host's blood. He was chasing a ghost, looking for a scientific miracle that would validate his god complex. His failure to capture her was a failure to secure his own life, a reality that made him increasingly violent and reckless as the story progressed. The relationship between the hunter and the hunted in Resident Evil 9 is a reflection of the larger themes of the franchise. It's a story of a corporation trying to harvest a human life for a biological advantage. Grace represents the natural world's resilience, while Zeno represents the manufactured horror of the labs. His need for her was a physical proof of his own weakness, a reminder that for all his speed and strength, he was still dependent on something he couldn't create. The hunt for Grace was the final act of a man who realized his power was a lie and was willing to destroy everything to make it true. Part 14. Zeno and Gideon. Two people. After the same thing, for completely different reasons. The ARC facility was defined by the tense, poisonous partnership between Zeno and Victor Gideon. While they were both focused on the research into the T virus and the LP strain, their motivations couldn't have been more different. Gideon was a man driven by scientific legacy and a cold curiosity about the limits of human biology. He didn't care about power or godhood. He cared about the data. He viewed the viruses as puzzles to be solved and the test subjects as data points to be measured. He wanted to be the man who finally perfected the progenitor legacy, a goal that was purely academic and institutional. Zeno, on the other hand, was driven by vanity and a desperate need for survival. He wanted the research to produce a practical result that he could use on himself. He didn't care about the beauty of the viral sequence or the history of the research. He only cared about the power it granted him. He viewed Gideon as a tool, a technician whose only job was to fix the flaws in Zeno's DNA. This conflict of interest created a rift in the facility's leadership, as Zeno's reckless demands for results often sabotaged Gideon's more careful, clinical approach to the science. This tension reached a breaking point during the development of the Elpis strain. Gideon saw the antiviral as a way to sanitize the world and start a new era of biological control, while Zeno saw it as a shortcut to his own stabilization. Zeno's arrogance led him to ignore Gideon's warnings about the volatility of the virus, and his interference eventually led to the catastrophic failure of the project. He was a man with a god complex who thought he knew more than the scientists who built him. This sabotage was the direct cause of the facility's downfall, a reminder that the monsters are often the biggest threat to their own creators. Gideon's contempt for Zeno was rooted in this fundamental difference in perspective. He saw Zeno as an unrefined animal who was wasting the potential of the Wesker genome on petty ambitions. He understood that Zeno was an imitation, a creature that lacked the intellectual depth to understand the power he was carrying. This professional resentment fueled the final betrayal, as Gideon realized that Zeno was more of a liability than an asset. They were two men tied together by a legacy of horror, each trying to use the other to achieve a goal that would eventually destroy them both. The dynamic between the scientist and the soldier is a recurring theme in the history of Umbrella, but in Resident Evil 9, it's taken to its most extreme conclusion. Zeno and Gideon represent the two faces of the corporate nightmare, the one who builds the monster and the one who wants to be it. Their failure to cooperate was the only thing that gave the heroes like Leon a chance to survive. It proved that the rot in the organization was just as dangerous as the virus in the labs. They were the architects of their own destruction, two men who were so focused on their own versions of the future that they didn't see the present burning down around them. Part 15. The moment with Leon. What Zeno's cruelty in the ARC facility reveals about what he actually was. The confrontation between Zeno and Leon S. Kennedy in the heart of the ARC facility is one of the most revealing moments in the game. Zeno doesn't just attack Leon, he mocks him, showing a deep knowledge of Leon's history with Umbrella and the Raccoon City incident. His cruelty isn't just a tactical move to unbalance his opponent. It's personal. He resents Leon for his role in destroying the world that Zeno was meant to rule. He sees Leon as the man who ended the golden age of biological warfare, leaving Zeno to pick through the ruins of a dead company. This resentment reveals that Zeno isn't a visionary, but a man obsessed with a past he didn't even participate in. During the fight, Zeno's dialogue reveals the depth of his identity crisis. He speaks as if he were the one who had faced Leon in 1998, blurring the lines between his own memories and the data he was programmed with. He's a man who has lost his own sense of self in the shadow of Albert Wesker. His cruelty toward Leon is a way to punish the man who represents the failure of the Wesker project. He wants to prove that he can do what the original couldn't, kill the survivor of Raccoon City. It's a battle for validation, a man trying to earn a name that doesn't belong to him through an act of extreme violence. Leon's response to Zeno's taunts is a reflection of his years of experience fighting bioterrorism. He doesn't see a god, he sees another victim of corporate ambition. He recognizes the pattern of behavior from every other BOW he's faced over the last 30 years. This dismissal infuriates Zeno, as it strips away the myth he's built around himself. Leon sees the imitation for exactly what it is, and he doesn't give Zeno the respect or the fear he craves. This psychological weight makes the fight more than just a physical encounter. It's a rejection of the Wesker legacy by the man who survived its most violent chapter. The moment with Leon proves that Zeno's power is entirely external. He has the speed and the strength, but he lacks the core of conviction that defined the original Wesker. He's a hollow man, filled with stolen anger and borrowed history. His cruelty is a mask for his inadequacy, a way to hide the fact that he's just an asset on a medical table. The confrontation shows that for all the work the connections put into building him, they couldn't build a soul. He is a biological forgery who is being confronted by the reality of the people who actually lived through the horror he's trying to mimic. As the fight progresses and Zeno's stability begins to fail, his arrogance turns into desperation. He realizes that he can't win through style alone, and he begins to use more and more of the viral power that's destroying him. This shift is a visual record of his collapse. He goes from a clinical, detached soldier to a feral, panicked animal. Leon's presence forces Zeno to face the truth of his own existence, a truth that he's not strong enough to survive. The encounter in the Ark facility was the final test for the imitation, and he failed it the moment he let his vanity take control of the engagement. Part 16. His Death. How Gideon kills him, what he says before he dies, and what gets buried with him. The death of Zeno is a cold, clinical conclusion to his story, fitting for a man who was built in a lab. As Zeno mutates into a grotesque nightmare, following his injection with the Elpis strain, Gideon realizes that the experiment is over. He doesn't try to save his asset, or even to gather more data. He simply triggers the Ark facility's containment purge, trapping Zeno in the primary incineration chamber. It's a betrayal that mirrors the way Spencer treated his own children, a reminder that in the world of biological warfare, failure is a death sentence. Gideon watches through a reinforced glass wall as the fires ignite, ending the career of the man who thought he was a god. Zeno's final words are a desperate, choked scream that echoes through the chamber. I am Wesker. It's a heartbreaking and pathetic ending for a man who spent his life trying to steal an identity. Even at the moment of his death, as his body melts and his mind dissolves, he's still clinging to the lie that defined him. He dies an identity thief, a man who never found out who he actually was because he was too busy trying to be someone else. The fires vaporize his mutated form, leaving nothing behind but the ash of a corporate project that failed to meet its goals. The death of Zeno also marks the burial of many of the syndicate's deepest secrets. As the incineration chamber clears and the facility begins its final self-destruct sequence, the data on Zeno's true origins and the other batch 01 candidates is lost. Gideon's betrayal ensures that the imitation is erased from the record, a tactical cleanup that prevents the heroes from learning the full scope of the cloning program. Zeno takes the secrets of his own creation to the grave, leaving the world with more questions than answers about the future of the Wesker legacy. He was a secret that was built to be kept, and his death is the final lock on the door. This moment is the narrative funeral for the era of the superhuman god. By showing a perfect clone fail so spectacularly and die so miserably, Resident Evil 9 tells the audience that the dream of Spencer and Wesker is officially over. You can copy the DNA and you can mimic the style, but you can't reproduce the monster. Zeno's death is a statement that the world has moved past the need for god kings, even as it continues to deal with the biological fallout of their ambition. He dies not as a legend, but as a manufacturing error that had to be sanitized. The silence that follows Zeno's death is the most important part of the scene. There's no grand music or heroic speech. There's just the hum of the incinerator and the smell of ozone. It's a reminder that Zeno was never a person to the people who built him. He was just an asset with a high maintenance cost. When he died, he was simply written off as a loss. This cold reality is the final insult to his vanity. You're proof that for all his power, he never truly mattered. He was a shadow that was finally erased by the light of a corporate purge, leaving the world a little quieter and a little safer. Section 5. What he means. Part 17. The Wesker legacy through Zeno. How Resident Evil 9 uses him to close the door on Wesker without bringing him back. Zeno's role in Resident Evil 9 is to serve as a narrative funeral for the character of Albert Wesker. For years, the franchise has lived in the shadow of the Kijuju volcano, with fans and writers alike wondering if the most iconic villain in the series could ever return. By introducing a perfect clone who has the power and the look of the original, the game addresses that desire directly. It gives the audience a version of Wesker to fight, but it does so in a way that proves the original man is truly gone. Zeno is the physical proof that while you can replicate a biological weapon, you can't replicate the specific circumstances that created a monster. The failure of Zeno is the final word on the Wesker legacy. It tells the audience that the era of the superhuman gods who rule through raw force is over. The horror of the modern Resident Evil era is no longer about one man's ego. It's about the institutional rot of organizations like the Connections. Zeno is a relic of an older way of thinking, a man who tried to use the tactics of the 90s to win a war in 2026. His spectacular collapse and his pathetic death are a statement that the franchise is moving on. He was the ghost of the past, and his destruction is the closure that the series needed to fully step into its future. Using Zeno as an imitation also preserves the weight of Albert's original death. If Albert had simply walked back into the story, it would have cheapened the sacrifice made by Chris and Shiva. By using a clone, the writers can explore the themes of the Wesker project without undoing the history of the fifth game. Zeno is a mirror that shows us why Albert was a 1-in-a-million fluke. He highlights the fragility and the instability of the T-virus legacy, showing that even with the best technology, you can't build a stable human being out of viral material. He's a cautionary tale about the limits of biological engineering. The legacy of Wesker through Zeno is one of diminishing returns. Each time a corporation tries to revive the project, the result is less stable and more desperate. Zeno is the end of that line, the final attempt to find a future in a project that died decades ago. He is the physical manifestation of the industry's inability to let go of its most successful product. By killing him, the game allows the characters and the audience to finally look away from the Spencer era and focus on the new, different horrors that are emerging from the shadows. Zeno was the funeral, and now the world can finally start to heal. Part 18. What we still don't know. The questions. Resident Evil 9. Deliberately left unanswered about his origins. Despite his death and the destruction of the Ark facility, Zeno leaves behind a chilling mystery that haunts the final moments of the game. During the data recovery sequence, a single file is found that lists Zeno's serial number as Z01. This simple designation implies a terrifying scale for the Syndicate's cloning program. If Zeno was the first of the Z batch, it suggests that there are at least 25 other letters in the alphabet, each representing a different line of experimentation. While Zeno is dead, the possibility remains that other imitations are still out there, hidden in other facilities around the world, waiting for their own chance to claim the legacy. The game also leaves the details of the other successful batches in the shadows. We know that Zeno was the peak of the 2026 program, but what about the earlier iterations? Were there other Wesker children who were more stable but less powerful? Or were they all disposed of by Gideon as manufacturing errors? This lack of information keeps the threat of the syndicate alive. It tells the player that they've only seen one head of the Hydra. The connections are a global network, and the Arak facility was just one node in a larger web of biological horror. Zeno was a representative, not the whole story. There's also the question of Zeno's original identity before he was reclaimed. If he truly was a survivor of a previous outbreak, who was he? Did he have a family, a name, or a life that he forgot once the prototype virus began to rewrite his brain? This personal mystery adds a layer of quiet tragedy to his character. He was a man who was hollowed out and filled with a corporate lie, and the world will never know who he could have been if the T-virus hadn't taken his city. This unanswered question is a reminder of the thousands of lives that were consumed by the search for a new god. The ambiguity of Zeno's origin and the potential for other clones ensures that the ghost of the Wesker project will never truly be gone. It's a permanent scar on the franchise's world, a biological legacy that can't be fully sanitized. Even with the development of the Elpis cure, the data on how to build a man from a virus is still out there. Resident Evil 9 concludes Zeno's story, but it leaves the door open for the next organization to try their hand at the same dangerous game. The questions left unanswered are the seeds of the next disaster, a reminder that in this world, the end is often just a new beginning for the horror